Your name?
Gordon Cobb.
Excellent. And this is being hosted by the Proportional Representation Action Team. We are an unregistered advertiser under the rules of the Referendum Act. That means there's the official yes and no sides, that they each got given $75,000 worth of public money to either put up big scary billboards or yes. Do advertising to try to convince people to vote yes and no. Our group is just fully made of volunteer effort, and we're buying a few ads with publicly funded, with privately funded donations. So we've received donations, small donations from Islanders between $10 and $500, so that we can try to do our work and engage people. But what we're wanting to do tonight is answer everyone's questions about mixed member proportional, and to, I suppose, try and give our case for why we think people should be voting yes. I hope that most of the people joining tonight are, hopefully you're people who haven't voted yet, and you're trying to make up your mind, so you're interested to hear our perspective. I hope we can convince you. Ultimately, it's your choice. And the other group of people who might be listening are, maybe people who've already voted or who are super keen yes voters, and you're looking for more detailed information. You're getting asked questions from your friends and family, and you just want to have some more of that detail to be able to answer them. To give some background on myself, as I said, my name's Anna. I have an Australian accent because that's where I was born, but I married an Islander and he brought me over here. So we live halfway between New Glasgow and Stanley Bridge. We own a 90-acre property that we rent half of it to a farmer, so very much a rural family, renovating a big 120-year-old farmhouse, and we've got a 3-year-old called Oscar who lives around the corner from my parents-in-law, which is delightful. And you, Gordon?
Yes, thanks, Anna, and we're very glad that you're here, and Robert brought you here. It's a wonderful thing to have you on the island, indeed. And Gordon Cobb, I'm from Morel, Prince Edward Island, and multi-generational Islander. I've been here, the ancestors have been here since 1765, and have a keen interest in politics and government. Used to work in politics, now work in government. Like to see innovations and changes and actions that make our community and our jurisdiction of Prince Edward Island become distinctive and innovative in the world and stand out. I think mixed member proportional is definitely that, and that's why the 2016 referendum, where mixed member proportional open ballot did pass. I was actively involved then too, and worked then as well then, and carrying on, just very excited about what I think is going to be a yes vote win on 23rd of April.
Personally, I'm feeling very nervous about it. I think we might be heading for a terrible crash because of some of the fear mongering that we've seen, or and maybe I shouldn't call it fear mongering, but a lot of concerns being raised, and I just hope that we can answer those concerns and reassure people as much as possible. So if you have any concerns, type them into the chat. We've got Nora Pendergast here who's reading the chat, and she's going to relay questions to us. And we'll sort of try to answer them over the next hour as we go. I suppose aside from being involved in 2005 and 2016, I was definitely part of the campaign that won that vote in 2016. But then we found out that we lost the next day when all of our 4 or 5 months of work was ignored, which was very sad for us. So here we are trying to run the campaign again. But I've lived in Australia and in Europe, in the Netherlands and Germany, and then moved to Canada. So I've experienced a bunch of different electoral systems, and I currently sit on the board of Fair Vote Canada as well. So definitely, I'll try to bring some of that background and information to bear and to share with all of you. So, Nora, do we have any questions to start off with?
I'll just follow up then, Anna, on what you're talking about there. Thanks, Nora. But I'm so glad you've been vigilant in what we call the development or iteration of a concept coming of age. Mm-hmm. It's important to realize that. And that in New Zealand, where mixed member proportional was adopted, there was a process that happened over a number of years. So here we are, yes, the vote in 2016 definitely indicated there was pretty strong polling results when you see that one, that an MP was wanted by Islanders, and I think we'll prove that on the 23rd. Part of that historical process, and this is where I want to address some concerns out there that I hear. In the 2005 vote, I was opposed to mixed member proportional closed list. And there's an important distinction. As the options were being developed by the committee for the 2016 vote, there were a number developed. I think we were voting on 5 and ranking 5 in that vote. But mixed member proportional was put forward as open list or open ballot. This is vital to understand because on the no side, besides the if you don't know,
vote no.
vote no, there's also been a very strong inaccuracy about mixed member proportional will create more power for back rooms or party elites. That might have some validity for closed lists, and that's why I was opposed to closed lists back 14 years ago. Because the threat would be there that you vote for a party and the party is putting people on the list and you're taking their list. This solved that. That problem has been solved. So any of the criticisms about that, I don't understand that. About party elites or backrooms running it. No, these are people that will be elected because Islanders vote for them. Same as we do in first past the post in terms of you put your X by the candidate you want. And other countries, I lived in Scotland and traveled in Europe, Germany, I've been in New Zealand. I followed the developments of MMP there. People are quite happy there with closed lists. Mm-hmm. And I get that. But I think for Prince Edward Island, for Canada, for North America, we developed a maiden PEI option here that will work for everybody here too, and that why people will support. This is why I believe it'll win, is because people will get very comfortable with that. Just like in the ridings, you can vote for people on the island-wide list, and you can vote them out the next time. Parties are going to have to be encouraged to do their very best with candidates to get enough votes to get the proportionality of seats. So like it's just like there is absolutely no fear from that, which I see repeated even today in the newspaper and all this about party back rooms and party elites. That's not the case. That's false.
So I'll pick up where you're leaving off, and I want to show you a couple of things. This is like I've been going around and doing presentations to sort of explain the how mixed member proportional really works. So I'd love to start with sort of showing you the ballot, describing a little bit of how the calculation happens, because a lot of people feel a little mystified by the maths. And we've got these like great, graphics and different visuals that I'll hold up to the camera real close in a sec. And it just contrasts quite remarkably with like these really text-heavy, sort of black and white, lots of text pages that are being produced by the referendum commissioner. So, the referendum commission is doing a great job regulating the rules of the referendum, but I think that the public education piece is what we're really, a gap that we're trying to fill. So I'm going to hold this up to the camera. Hopefully that works. And you can see these graphics on our website, pronpei.vote. And on a video we've got on the front page. But this is what Gordon's talking about here. In mixed member proportional, you've got 2 votes. The first one's for a district representative, and the second is for an individual from a party. So see how you've got all those circles on those waterfalls? The parties present like a list of people who've been nominated by party members, and you get to put an X next to a single individual on that list. You don't just say, green, and then, the Greens put whoever they want in. You actually get to rank the individuals between there, and that's the primary difference between 2005 and 2018. Nora's got a question for us.
Alison McDonald says how or whether MMP
benefits rural PEI.
I can start that one if you like.
Cool.
Yeah,
Question
sure.
from Alison McDonald. I'll repeat it. How does MMP benefit rural PEI?
It's a very important and good question because it's changing the electoral system, and rural Islanders have every good reason to be wondering about what that change means. I would suggest that that in terms of the island-wide ballot and who ends up getting elected there, we probably will marginally see more rural advocates, more people that either understand or care about rural policies and rural issues, rural concerns, than we do now. We had great MLAs who work hard for ridings, but in actually terms of of people seeing candidates from differing parties who have ideas about agriculture and the fishery and rural development such as that. This will be a major improvement in terms of what rural people can do in electing people that can deal with these issues. I think it is a plus and a big plus.
Cool. I'd love to speak to this as well. I went up to O'Leary on Saturday night, 2 nights ago, and did a presentation for people who, are from that very rural and often quite neglected area up west. One of my, a newfound good friend of mine is the former Progressive Conservative MLA for that district, Philip Brown. Hi, Philip, if you're watching. And he's been involved in agriculture for 25 years and then involved in politics. And we know that under first past the post, every time the boundaries have been redrawn, which happens about every 3 elections, that rural ridings have gotten larger as the population has become more urbanized and people feel like, okay, the rural vote is being diluted, we're having less say in the legislature. And so when people look at mixed member proportional and they see, okay, 27 districts is becoming 18 and all of the districts are getting larger, it has that echo of like what we know is this constant historical dilution and under first past the post of that rural vote. And so it feels similar and it feels scary. But I want to reassure rural voters, and I'm a rural voter myself, that it's not only the rural districts that get bigger this time, it's also the urban districts. All of the districts equally get larger and have more voters in them. They go up from 3,000 something to about 5,000, which is still very small compared to most districts in all parts of Canada. And the benefit that rural voters get and voters everywhere get is in return you get these 9 proportionally represented representatives, so that everywhere on the island your vote will really count and will really matter to have an impact. So you get these 2 votes. Under first past the post, we know that 40% on average, 45% of people, because we have more than 2 parties now, vote for the winner. And it's like, great, those people are represented. But in every district, rural or urban, there's a bunch of people who go home on election night feeling like they've lost. And we've all had that experience where like our team wins and you're happy for the next 4 years, or our team loses and you feel like, hey, the person I voted for didn't get elected, so why did I even bother going to vote? The election result would have been the same, right? If you hadn't turned up. But with mixed member proportional, you get 2 votes. You get your local district vote and you get a proportional vote. And every proportional vote across the whole island is counted every time. So if you're a voter in, we'll use O'Leary as an example, and your interest is in agriculture, on that second ballot, you can place your vote for someone who's a strong agriculture candidate who might live in Morel, someone who doesn't live in your district but who represents your values.
And you wouldn't have had that chance before.
Exactly.
You would not have had that chance before in the current districts. You wouldn't have the chance to vote for that great person from Morel as an O'Leary voter, or vice versa. But in this, you can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'll wrap up on the rural thing and then we'll go to the next question. I actually wrote up in response to some of the questions I was hearing from O'Leary on Saturday night, I wrote up on the website a response on our frequently asked questions page. So if you go to pronpei.vote/FAQ, you'll find there's a rural question there. You can click on that and read a little bit more. And also on our homepage, we've got some videos from farmer Sally Bernard, from our friend Philip Brown, who can give some more insight on the question of rural voters. Yeah.
So the next question is from Maria Eisenhower, and she says, what about people fearing a party putting all lawyers on their MMP list, or
I love this question.
all Charlottetown residents on their MMP list?
So how did the lists get chosen? Thank you, Maria Eisenhower, for your excellent question. Could a party put all Charlottetown lawyers on their list? What do you think on this one, Gordon? Let's have you answer this one first.
The making of the list, and because it's directly voted upon, like the individuals are voted upon. So it's not the party makes a ranking, you vote for a party, and the top of the list of Charlottetown lawyers, or it might be, go through. It's the voters who determine, and then the seats are awarded proportionally, but it's the voters determine. So. I don't want to pick on Charlottetown lawyers maybe as much as you do, Maria, but it's a good example. And I think any party that does that might find themselves not doing so well with the rest of the electorate. if they're, and probably not getting the vote they get and not getting the members they get. The wonders of this, I call it, it's great competition collaboration system. It's a competitive election that leads to a more collaborative politics. And I think in this, if whatever the party might put forward for a list and who they think they can get people to vote for, well, they might be in for some kind of rude shocks and surprises if they don't put people on the list. I think it's much more likely that the great rural advocate from one part of the island will be elected by a great number of rural islanders. I think that's much more likely than perhaps someone who might have great talents but might not really appeal to the electorate as much as a list of full-scale town lawyers might. So.
Yeah, I find this question remarkable because we do have a bunch of people who oppose the no side. If you look up their history, you can often find them on the donor lists of some of the major parties, and they're suggesting that a party could put all Charlottetown lawyers on the list. I'm like, really? Is that what your party would do?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I don't think that there's any political party who would dare try that. So even though it is like technically a possibility that a party could, the incentive to not do that is built in to the system. They'll be really punished at the polls by trying any sort of tactic like that. There's a built-in incentive naturally in this system to put forward as diverse and representative a list as possible because you're trying to capture votes from every different constituency on the island. And you're also not going to put candidates up there who are second rate. You're going to be putting islanders of the highest integrity. You're going to be putting people on that list who are well known, who are well supported, because your party has to get all of its support to determine its proportionality by putting forward really appealing candidates. So you're going to try to appeal to the electorate and just be as appealing as possible. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to see women on the ballot. I strongly suggest that we would see from every party an Indigenous representative, an Acadian representative, at least one really strong rural advocate, and at least one representative from the fishing community. Because if you're a party who doesn't do that, then all of the voters from that party are probably going to vote for the rural advocate or the fishing representative from a different party. And so to compete in those constituencies, you need to put forward a representative from that community on your list.
Next question's from Matt McCarville. Do you know anything about the origin of first past the post?
Do you?
Well,
you're more of a historian.
That's really reaching back there, but we would. When I made reference to it earlier in our earlier chats. Of course, it's even before the British, but it's the British parliamentary system, the Whitehall system. The idea of ridings where you could cross the district, the electoral officer in medieval England could cross the district in one day riding his horse, thus the riding.
Oh,
wow. It's got that kind of a geographical basis, and democracy has older roots than that. But it was largely, I think, largely Whitehall and the British system are what we've seen evolve, and Canada. There are variations. There are, United States Republic, but still is, well, it's first past the post, but also electoral colleges. It's complicated, but first past the post is rooted in the British system. I think that's fair to say, in the writing system. Here in Prince Edward Island, it's first past the post. We have a complicated history too with the old dual member system, the council and the assembly. But it certainly was in a time when most of the society the population was kind of well spread around, and there were lots of ridings, So, but if I can answer if there are any other questions around that, it's Matthew, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can, but I think that's roughly where the history of first past the post at the end.
Yeah. And I would suggest as well that it was a system invented or that evolved, over a few hundred years ago now, when people's communities were much more geographically based, and people didn't travel and trade and connect with common interests that actually cross geographic boundaries. So I think that's for me, one of the great benefits and pluses of moving to mixed member proportional, is that not only do we have our local geographic communities represented, the places that we live, but we can also vote for our values and for our communities that spread across districts. So we can start to have those communities represented that are not geographically based, like farmers, like fishers, Acadian, Indigenous.
They're spread across the island.
Yeah, they're spread all the way across the island. The cultural sector, all of those sorts of different sectors of society.
Alan Hicken asks, will the local district seats be under the variance population?
Be under the variant?
Do they still continue
Oh, yes. Yeah.
under the, you want to just elaborate on that? That's the review of the
Yeah, I think the question is
question.
like how will the local districts be determined? And the Boundaries Commission actually redrew last year in preparation for this vote what the new boundaries would be, very specifically if we went from 27 in first past the post to 18 plus 9 with the proportional system. And yes, the population variance still applies. So they try to make each of the ridings about the same population, the same number of voters. So I think in the proportional system, I probably don't have my number exactly right. It's roughly 5,000 per district, plus or minus 10%. And so they often use that plus or minus 10% to try to keep some rural communities slightly smaller, or to make sure that the Acadian community in Miscouche, for example, is represented. But ultimately, the ridings are divided up so that there's an equal number of voters in each. But one of the nice things about proportional representation is that no matter how you divide the boundaries, and processes called gerrymandering, where those boundaries could try to be manipulated, that can't influence the overall island-wide popular vote, where every vote, the values-based votes across the whole island, are added up to determine, the whole island is 40% Liberal, 10% Green, 10% NDP, 37% PC. That was the numbers in the last election. I expect them to change dramatically next Tuesday, which is going to be shocking for everyone. But all across the island, no matter how you draw the boundaries, the 18 boundaries, those the numbers across the island are going to be the same. And so the balance of proportionality in the legislature should be the same result, and everybody's vote will count regardless of how the boundaries are drawn.
Next question.
Yes.
Chris Ortenberger
Hi, Chris.
asks, how do minority governments elected by MMP differ from minority governments elected by first past the post?
So how are
People are
minority
concerned.
governments different to first past the post majorities?
Well, we've had minority governments sometimes in the first past the post as well, of course, in Canada, but we've had them quite a bit in countries that have adopted PR.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure of the dates, but I think it's safe to say that in Scotland, Germany, New Zealand, most governments were stable for significant periods of time and didn't have to go back to an election. They seem to be quite productive in terms of legislation and policies, and many would argue more so than some first past the post governments. That history is there. Interestingly, the mixed member proportion doesn't necessarily lead to minority government either. The Scotland in 2011, the Scottish National Party won a majority. They're active in instituting their additional member system, which is similar to MNP, and they won some minorities. I think they have a minority now, but they won a majority. And there may be other factors in this, but I think that's a party, of course, a nationalist party, but very broad base, and they won a majority because in that election they really put up the campaign, the candidates, and such. And there's an example of a majority government being elected under PR. With Scotland in 2011. So minority governments, we don't have any record among the countries that we know where it's caused negatives. We do know the size of the assemblies grew in terms of the number of women, and they've all become more gender balanced. The Prime Minister of Germany is a woman who has a very demanding job with dealing with Brexit coming from one side and all that, and she's under that system. Nicola Sturgeon is the First Minister in Scotland, who has a mandate from her whole assembly how to handle Scottish affairs in the context of Brexit. And in New Zealand, we had this, besides the assembly that steadily grew with women, also we had an amazing First Minister Jacinda Ardern,
She's incredible.
who with a minority government, after the gun massacre they had in Christchurch, that they proceeded to a significant ban on assault weapons there, and a massive vote within days. So there's a minority government taking decisive action when its people wanted it,
yeah.
and they did that, and that's a particularly great prime minister, great parliament. They did it.
Yeah. I'll speak to this one as well. As Gordon said, like under a proportional system, you can still get a majority government, but only if you have won a majority of the votes. And then your government is going forward with a really strong and legitimate mandate. What we have now under first past the post is majority government, 60% of the seats, which has 100% of the power, with only 40% or 37% of the vote. And that applies both provincially and federally right now. And what that means is, I've heard from people in the legislature, they say, well, that means the government can bring forward legislation, we can go through the motions of a great debate, we can have it, in the court of public opinion and the media, but ultimately, amendments that we put forward, or no matter how great the debate was, the government can still just push it through. And that applies to legislation. It also applies to budgets. And budgets, they happen every year. In a minority government situation, when the government brings forward legislation, if you want that to pass, or if you want your budget to pass, it has to be subject to the scrutiny of at least one other party, and that scrutiny helps to improve it. It helps to make sure that schemes that only benefit one party or that are slightly dodgy can't be pushed through for the benefits of the mates of that party. I really think that if PEI had proportional representation, we would not have seen the PNP and the e-gaming scandal, because there would have needed to be at least one other party sign off on that. And so, that's part of the benefits, is you actually slow down decision making to make better decisions. People often say, well, isn't working in coalition really cumbersome and tiresome and things never get done? No, you can clearly still get things done, but the outcomes are going to be more positive because you've got some accountability and oversight before laws are passed. So, when you're trying to, you also avoid the policy flip-flop with minority governments, because if you need to get another party to sign off on your stuff, then you don't get that switch from the red majority to the PC or the conservative majority, who then spends their whole first year in office undoing the changes that the last government made.
Yeah.
So you get this policy continuity, and things. Yeah, you don't get ill thought through policies that are sort of rushed through to one party's preference that are then completely reversed. You actually you force the parties to collaborate together in order to pass anything. And so they talk about it, they hammer out the differences, and they pass something that everyone can stick to. And there's a lot of research by Arend Leipart, is one of the amazing academics who's done a comparative study on this. And they find that countries with proportional representation are much better on issues that are broader than a single 4-year mandate. For example, climate change, housing policy, health, transit planning, because you can make 10 and 25-year plans that are agreed on by multiple parties, and they all see it through over the fluctuations in who's elected.
How it will unfold here, I just think important issues will not drop off the public policy agenda. And it's more than just, to me, it's more than government. There'll be MLAs who are elected. Quite apart from the idea of who's governing, it's who's representing.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of this too. And then that will give us fairness in terms of issues being addressed. Might not be my issue, but it's somebody else's. So this system will see it addressed, and I think we'll be happy with that. I think we'll like that.
Yeah.
Is that Grace's question you answered?
There's a new one?
We have
8 new questions. All right, we'll be briefer.
8 new questions. Okay.
Sorry.
So Grace Kempinski asks, MIT's member proportional seems more individual-based voting than party-based voting. With so many islanders being party loyal, how much of a change will we see with MLP?
Ooh, wonderful question.
That's a great question.
how loyal do you think people are to parties these days? I mean, sometimes you're born into a political party, but that's starting to shift a little, I think.
We should look at our historical differences, though. There have been there's been a strong sense of party love historically. The Liberals and Conservatives have had a lot of members. That's fair to say, core members. That's a reality. The kind of the reality we see emerging now, and look to see what actually happens in the election, but I think we're seeing in future elections is that we're entering a more of a multi-party system. So I want to be sure I answer Grace's question. This could be a good start on here. More individual, I think that was something to that effect, Nora. Sorry, I had that.
More individual voting rather than party voting, or given the history.
Individual-based voting.
Yeah.
It's MMP seems more individual-based voting than party-based voting.
It could lead to that,
yeah.
And political parties and how they govern themselves could lead to that. But I think there's certainly more room for that in this type of system, especially if there could be a party that consistently just gets a few seats, but has a big impact on public policy.
Yeah. We've seen a single representative from the Greens, and now two have quite a significant impact on public policy. I've thought of three things that I want to say to answer this question. I'll try to say them really short. First up, I think independent candidates are going to have a way better chance of being elected under mixed member proportional, and that's because of the separation on the ballot between your local district representative and your second vote, which is for what party or for who you want to govern the province. And this is great because currently in First Past the Post, like I have a great local MLA, his name's Brad Trivers, and he's from the Progressive Conservative Party. He's a good mate of mine. But I do not personally identify with progressive conservative values, so I'm not going to vote for him. I voted today, and sorry, Brad, didn't vote for you.
It's a system again.
Because right now your locally based vote is tied to who's the party that you want to see lead the province. And by separating out these two questions, you can actually vote for who is the greatest local representative for our area, and separately to that, what's my set of values across the province. And I think that that's a really positive thing. So it means that if there's a nonpartisan candidate in a district, you can vote for that nonpartisan candidate in your district without worrying about how it's going to affect the overall balance of the legislature and who ultimately becomes premier. I had two other things to say, but I forget them now. We might circle back to them. Yeah.
So next question's from John Martin. Here in the far west, we had a major concern regarding the education review that took place, with the initial recommendation and fear of closure of schools. Major lobby efforts to change the course of this review seem to change the course of action regarding our schools. How might that have been different with the proportional representation system in place? Great
question, and great thumbs up advocacy for saving rural schools. I'm a huge supporter of that effort. I think I question whether the proposal to close rural schools would ever have come up in the first place under a mixed member proportional system. I think that the school review that took place was the rules on it were defined by a single party government right now, and they directed the public school board to take a review of how do we educate the most people while saving budget in the education system. And that was sort of the scope for the review, and it came out with close rural schools, centralize them in urban areas. And then we had to spend so much time as residents, and I was part of that movement as well, fighting back against this proposal that had come from that flawed process. I think that the process itself to close rural schools would never have gotten to that stage if we'd had multiple parties in coalition, and someone from one of the smaller, minor coalition partners would have stuck up their hand and say, hey, we shouldn't only be considering the number of students per cost, we should also be considering the additional value that small rural schools make to rural communities. We would have had a different set of values informing that first decision. So I think and I hope, and I do believe this as well. This is my experience that I've had in places that have proportional representation, is that citizens need to spend less time fighting back against their government's ill-informed proposals, because you can actually be, you're heard and you're part of co-creating those proposals. Civil society is much more respected. And yeah, you don't have to react so much as contribute to improving long-term governance. So
I just throw in that over time, with mixed member proportional and more diverse legislatures and some great advocates being presented, the nature of government will start to change. Cabinet government will start to change. How major public policy initiatives, there'll be less of this jack in the box type thing, like here it is suddenly, and let's everybody react to that, and governments can use that for political strategy too. I'll talk about this for a while. When there's a lot of things we're talking about. I think over time with this system that we will see other reforms and the nature of government and how public policy are made. Not everybody always gets what they want, but I think the experience in other jurisdictions is that people are treated more fairly and the information is used more appropriately.
Yeah. The Dutch, when I lived in the Netherlands, the Dutch have a word for this style of government, which is the polder model. I'll see if I can put a link in the chat to that later on. And it's this slow, deliberative, consensus-building style of political discourse. And we're not used to that here in Canada because we have first past the post, which divides us into us and them. And it's this, black, white, left, right, red, blue, oppositional style of politics. Whereas if we switch to a proportional system, the incentives that are baked into that system result in an entirely different discussion where you actually need to appeal to everybody, because you're not only trying to serve, a small core of partisans and you hope that you win and you can ignore everybody else. You actually have to please and appeal to everybody because everyone is suddenly your constituent and you're competing with for every voter's attention. So you need to take everyone into account. Next question.
That's great.
Speak up really loud so the microphone can pick it up.
John Getson, just a comment. The only reason to vote no is if one truly believes that things are the best they can ever be, that there is absolutely no room for any improvement. So that's just a nice comment.
Thank you, John. Agreed.
Heather Nicholson writes, thanks for holding this event. My question is whether other countries that have adopted MMP have found it difficult to get policies implemented because the voice in government is spread over several parties with different goals and values.
Great question.
And we've touched on that already because the questions are back in time and we're going over topics, but we had examples of we talked about New Zealand. We talked about how that minority collaborative government was able to deal with the gun ban after the crisis. Like there's certainly no delay on that. Like or how I believe Scotland is run under their system, AMS, which is similar to NP, that they're not unproductive. There's this fascinating thing about going slowly, more deliberate at certain things, but actually everything moves along quite well. As I haven't read articles or reports that suggest that they do not. That things actually do move productively.
I think we can all look at Germany and agree that in the last 60 years, Germany as a nation has done very well. Has a very high standard of living, has excellent healthcare, public transport. I've been there, I lived there, I've worked there. It's they're doing well. Higher minimum wages, like lower poverty rates. They're still grappling with great education in Germany. They're still grappling with really complex and divisive issues at the moment. On immigration is a really big one at the moment, but we're not likely to see in those countries, a sudden swing to extreme views on anti-immigration. Yes, there are anti-immigration parties that are getting more representatives, but they're not getting an unfair majority that can suddenly push through their policies. Instead, that discussion is evolving slowly over time, and I think will settle out to the right balanced outcome. I can speak specifically to New Zealand because I work very closely with a New Zealander and we chat about politics there often. They have a really unique situation. When there is multiple parties in a government and none of them have a majority, there's multiple different outcomes. You can form a coalition that has a majority. You can, and in that situation, you would have multiple parties sitting at the cabinet table, or you can choose to have a minority coalition that needs to negotiate with other parties on a bill-by-bill basis, or you can have a single-party minority government that again negotiates with other parties on a bill-by-bill basis. And in New Zealand right now, they have this sort of hybrid model where Jacinda Ardern's party has the largest number of seats, so they're leading the government. But they have a Green, James Shaw, he sits in cabinet only when they're discussing his portfolio. He's a minister on climate change, sustainability, environment stuff. And he sits in cabinet when they're discussing his portfolio. But then he actually chose to say, I don't want to be in cabinet for all of the other discussions when you're talking about other issues, because I want to be able to criticize you openly. And so there's this really interesting thing, because cabinet solidarity is this principle in Westminster systems that means that, if your cabinet makes a decision, if you're a minister and part of that cabinet, you have to stick by it. But in New Zealand, they managed to make this really interesting separation of collaboration on certain policies and then maintaining that distance of bill-by-bill basis for others. And then there's also confidence and supply agreements, which is like what the Green and NDP collaboration have in British Columbia right now.
Next question from Matt McCarville. Are there also subnational jurisdictions like provinces, states, or municipalities using MMP and PR? Recently, someone wrote, PEI is not a country. I'd say so. New Zealand's an island with a smaller or similar population to other Canadian provinces.
Yes, thank you for asking this question. Oh, this has bothered me so much because, of course, the yes side, we've been using places that people know about through global news media as our examples. Germany, New Zealand, Scotland, Wales, places with a very similar culture. And now the no side, about a week ago, they picked on that and they said, but we're not a country. They've got millions of people. We're a tiny population. And so we had to do a bunch of research because the no side, sorry, I'm being a bit mean here, but I don't think they do research. Nearly every province in Germany uses MMP. Including Saarland, which is half the geographic size of Prince Edward Island. Every municipality by law in South Africa uses mixed member proportional to elect municipal governments, very small scale. And I can speak more about that. South Africa has a fascinating history, 90% black, 10% white, and they really need proportional representation there to ensure that there is not one racial minority exerting power over a majority. And then in addition, there were questions about, how can this work in a legislature of only 27 people? These other countries have many hundreds of people in their legislature. But the London Assembly, which is part of the Greater London Authority, London, UK, it has 25 representatives elected by mixed member proportional. And we found, after we did our research, a small region of Bavaria in Germany where they elect a contingent of 18 representatives to the Bavarian state legislature using mixed member proportional. I think it is called I've got it written in the FAQs on the website. But that argument from the no side is it's designed to scare people and is not based in fact.
Yeah, and Scotland is subnational to the UK, much to my chagrin sometimes, but Scotland is subnational to the UK and has its own assembly run on additional member, which is a mixed member proportional. Also, PEI is not a country. I find that so fascinating. We're a place, and we have a system of governance, and we have the capacity to change it, and I think we're on our way to doing it. And we may not be a country, but we have a sense of ourselves. And we can make changes and innovations that make us stand out in the world and in North America. And I think we're going to do it on April 23rd by voting in MMP. So we may not be a country, but we're a great place. And we're in a process of change and growth, and I think that's what's going on here.
My fingers are crossed. Please vote yes. Tell all your friends and family. Actually, on that topic, I'll take a pause before we take the next question. Talk to your friends and family. We've got 1 week. The advanced polls have been very strong, so people who've made up their mind, about 40%, 35, 40% of the island has already voted. But if you've got, okay, maybe 30%, if you've got friends and family who've not voted yet, and you're thinking of leaning yes, or even if you're still undecided, please, everywhere you go, talk to your family, talk to your friends, especially older family and friends who might be more resistant to change. That was definitely the case in 2016. Just start the conversation. Ask people, do you know how you're voting on the referendum ballot yet? Tell people why. If they've got questions, try to answer them. If you can't answer them, then say, oh, hey, I'll ask the people at the PR action team. We will try to answer as many questions as we can. Check out our FAQs, share those answers very broadly with everybody. It's going to take a real team effort if we are going to get that yes vote next Tuesday. Next question.
Next question from Chris Ortenberger. What about the fear that one fringe party person elected by MMP will hold the balance of power?
Do you want to do this one? Or
Well,
there you
know,
go.
just one fringe party person. Yeah, it's. I just don't like predicting the results of elections before they happen and who gets there. But we take a theoretical scenario here. Could be a balance of power. I don't think so. I think we're in a multi-party system with probably 3 or more parties having seats. We'll run probably much like New Zealand along the 3 different models that Anna just spoke about, that no one person is going to, MLA is going to be able to hold the government hostage, because if that person is uncooperative, we just move on to other members and other parties or other members to get things done. And that's what's done in other places, and that's the way we've done here.
Yeah. And then after 4 years, that uncooperative member is probably not going to be elected again if they demonstrate that they're not able to collaborate with other parties and they're trying to hold them hostage and be threatening. That person won't be reelected. But in addition, like if you have, if you had, 2 large parties and someone was holding, one party was holding 3 seats in the middle, that group of 3 seats in the middle does not hold 100% of the power. It holds 10% of the power. That party cannot push through their agenda without their agenda being agreed to by one of the other parties. And if you actually look at the platforms that each of the 4 major parties and some of the independents have put forward in this election, you will see that there are common elements across those platforms. So it's not going to be hard for them to say, oh, you know what, the Greens and the PCs actually have quite a similar approach on renewable energy, for example. So both the leader of those 2 parties plus the NDP all support proportional representation too. So that's not hard to find a solution on. I know that the NDP and the PCs have been talking about affordable housing and how to address that issue. Maybe there'll be a Liberal NDP collaboration on a social justice or diversity and inclusion initiative, for example. I think there's no one party is going to be able to push through 100% of their agenda, even if they have that coveted balance of power. You could even get the 2 largest parties collaborating, and those 3 in the middle aren't going to matter. But yeah, it's in this system, no party can ever have more power than they've earned from the voters. So if you get 10% of the vote, you'll have 10% of the power. If you get 40% of the vote, you'll have 40% of the power, and you've got to find your allies. You're forced to collaborate to get things done, to get things across that magical 50% threshold.
Question?
Yeah.
From Hannah Girel. There seems to be fear that MMP will negatively affect rural islanders. Can you speak to why this fear is unfounded? Okay.
Yes. Okay. That was one of the first questions that we dealt with today as well. I'd like to talk to where that fear comes from, or who is driving that fear. I believe that these anxieties around lack of rural representation are being driven by people who disproportionately benefit from the current system. And I think that if you're a rural islander, you know that you do not benefit from the current system. We have seen a gradual slide in services and in the voice of rural islanders under first past the post. And there are certain people who've become enriched by this system, and they're trying to they're trying to stoke fear in the rural population to say this is going to change, it's going to make everything bad for you, because they're trying to defend the system that they benefit from.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. We did have a caller earlier, John Martin from up west,
That's true.
that
Yeah.
spoke quite legitimately to how effectively he feels his local MLAs worked with him and others to stop the school closures.
Mhm.
So there are some real
That's true.
situations that come up too that people can feel that changes might reduce that capacity. And we did answer, and I'll answer it again. And this goes back to how the island-wide people are elected and what they're there for in terms of representation, that you can elect people who are strong in rural policy or educational policy, or are just good advocates or good collaborators. And I think there'll still be a net plus for rural PEI. Recognize,
Mhm.
I do recognize some of the truth of the
Yeah.
manipulation you're talking about, but also there are some valid concerns that rural people, and John Martin from West Princeton talked about that earlier. And I think over time we'll have better assemblies. I think it'll impact cabinet government. I think it'll impact how policies are made, and that any of the virtues or strengths that good solid MLAs and in the first past the post, you'll get that and more from mixed merit partial. We're still majority rural. The greater Charlottetown area is still only about a third of the population. Like if Islanders want to elect like people that can really stand up for rural communities, stand up for agricultural industries, stand up for the community institutions such as schools and such, that they can do I believe a better job under mixed merit proportional than the first past the post.
Yeah. Proportional representation means that every voter has equal voice and influence, and if rural Islanders make up 70% of the voting population, we should have 70% of the voice in the
It's
legislature.
50-some.
Yeah,
It's
50, you know.
Charlottetown and Summerside
So,
are roughly 45%.
yes. That's right, when you add Summerside as well.
Yeah.
I think, also the rural-urban division on PEI is, it's a sort of pseudo-division because, most or a large chunk of the people who live in Charlottetown have come from rural backgrounds. We've got someone in the room here who lives in Charlottetown but works in a small rural school. We're a primarily rural province, and our capital is very much linked to the communities that cross the island. So you'll still have a local district MLA, and you'll also have the ability to pool your votes with others who share common interests. So the farming community, the fishing community could elect representatives from those communities regardless of where you live on the island. You live in Montague, or you can vote for a strong agricultural representative even if they live in Mulpepe Bay.
I think people are going to find that really appealing. Like it's great to elect a good district representative. People are going to find it really appealing if you're in West Prince, but you think really the best rural advocate in the province lives in Kings County, that you can actually vote for that person on this system where you couldn't before. You had to vote in your district, and that's it. I think people are going to find that really appealing. People are going to vote across party lines, start changing their thinking more that way because they believe that's the best person on that list. There's a lot of good, positive, healthy psychology is going to come out of this.
Yeah. Next question.
Next question is from Fred Horn. How do the 9 candidates get placed on the ballot, and where do these 9 people come from?
Great question. So if you are part of a political party on Prince Edward Island, you will know that there are always calls for strong internal democracy within your party. So if a party leadership set tried to say, we in the back room or we on the provincial council are going to select who the candidates are going to be, then you are going to have an uproar from the members of your party. They're going to complain. They're going to leave the party en masse. They'll go to somewhere that's more democratic. So I think that we will see the standard practice in other countries or jurisdictions that have an MP, I think is going to be the same here, that all of the members across the whole island from a political party will be able to vote on people who put themselves forward and who volunteer to be on the list. And so, you'll probably rank the candidates. Let's say that there are 20 people who say, I volunteer to be on the list. You'll probably rank them, 1 through 20, or just choose your top 5, and then those votes will go to select, who is that party putting forward as the most favorite candidate, second, third, fourth. And so it actually promotes not only inter-party competition, but also intra-party competition. So within the party, you've got this democratic mechanism to see who's floating to the top of the party's recommended list.
It's up to the parties and how to do it, and nomination processes and such, and Anna's reviewed that quite a bit. But ultimately, it's people you put on the list that can get votes. Individuals. It's not just a party vote. It's you're voting for the individuals. So
and
it's going to be a competitive process.
Yeah. And different parties could also apply different rules for diversity and representation on their list. And this is one of the big benefits for women and for underrepresented groups. For example, in Sweden, a number of the parties require the party lists to be what they call zippered lists. So the order of candidates has to alternate between male and female and non-binary people. Going through the list so that you're actually presenting a list that has gender parity. In PEI, I would expect parties to reserve and say, out of the 9 candidates, a minimum of 3 or 4 have to be rural representatives.
Or
5 or 6 or 7.
5 or 6 women. It could be what the party does, and whichever party's smart enough to gauge. But I think we'll see consistently the number of women being higher. I think we'll see that's happened elsewhere, and that will lead to more gender balanced assemblies.
There's it's very well researched that countries that introduce proportional systems tend to have, I think it's about 7 or 8% higher representation of women. And we know that women are 50% of the population, but I think the average is something like 25% of the nominees in our current election are women. Getting on the ballot is the main challenge. Once women are on the ballot, they compete equally with men in the population, but the changes to nomination processes to make it easier for women and for diverse groups to be part of the process in the first place is where the main benefit with mixed member proportional comes from. In addition to and the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women, visit their website if you're interested in women's representation and representation of diverse groups. They have some wonderful research. But we know that the more collaborative and less combative, less us and them culture, there's less bullying and harassment that often excludes women, or they say, hey, I just don't want to be a part of that. That tends to decrease in proportional systems, which means that women are more likely to put themselves forward and put their families through the hell of
to work on policies instead of playing politics all the time.
Exactly. So it's motivating.
Next question's from Stephen DeGrasse. Mildred Dover wrote in The Guardian this weekend that she is concerned that the list seat MLAs might not take their jobs seriously because of the way they are elected. What would you say to this criticism?
They're elected by the voters. They don't take their job seriously. They'll be fired by the voters just like the first class of votes.
Yep, exactly. And in addition, there's they've been elected usually. I think we've made the case during this hour, that they're elected by a strong constituency that represents a specific issue or a specific demographic, and so they're going to fight for that demographic if they want to keep their votes next time. In addition, there's some really interesting rules. Like once we get this agreement to this change to happen, we can continue to evolve and improve the system over time. And one of the interesting rules that I like, I think this one's in Germany, I have to confirm that, is that you can't be elected on a party list for more than 2 terms. So if you've been elected via the list mechanism twice, then you can't be on a party list a 3rd time. You have to, if you want to be elected, you have to run in a local district. And so you use those first 8 years that you've got as an MLA. You might still establish a district office, potentially in a place where your party does not currently have representation, and you try to build you build relationships in that local community, and you try to build your credibility so that you can be elected as a district representative. So you work hard so that you're going to be reelected.
But this still seems to be persisting out there, and people writing letters and talking about people not being elected or
that they'll be appointed.
Or they'll be appointed, or I don't know why that's still being said. Like that people are, and I really want to make this point. it's one thing to have good arguments and bad arguments and good points and be right or wrong. That's not even valid. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's not valid. Like, this is like, these are people that when they're elected, they'll be elected by thousands more people than they're elected in the districts. But just by all of us, by all of us Islanders. Like, it's, so please, let's not see any more letters about like people not being elected or back rooms picking lists and all that. That's over. Like, that, we've been talking about that for weeks. Stop doing that. Like, you know, I'll talk to any no voter about anything, but if you're going to keep talking about something that isn't real, then what are we supposed to do?
Everyone's getting very passionate.
Well, it's just like,
Yeah.
I'm reading this letter saying, have you not read the first page of the actual proposal or looked at anything? Like, no, this is like, parties will put forward people to run as candidates, and people will vote on them, and they'll be awarded seats according to proportionality. And if they aren't picking the best people, they're not going to get seats. And if they pick the wrong people, they're going to be defeated. MMP open ballot has exactly the same principle that way as first past the post. You elect people directly, and you remove them by not voting for them. It's the same thing. Let's just please stop that.
Yes, yes, I'm with you, Gordon.
Really?
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll add here, yeah, I find it really unfortunate the level of political discourse that we've had in the lead up to this vote. You know, if you don't know, vote no. It's dangerous and scary, and democracy is under attack, with no actual like facts or references to back that up. I don't think that that's the right way that we should be making decisions. We should be considering the evidence. We should be, you know, making that broadly available and having deliberative discussions about the pros and cons. I think the way that the rules have been set up for this referendum to give $75,000 to each side is unnecessarily polarizing. I think that the rules were quite fair in the 2016 referendum. The no side had a chance to raise private funds and to organize at that stage, and they chose not to. And the government, which we know has a clear position, they don't want to honor the vote. They don't want mixed member proportional to happen because the Liberal Party has historically benefited from first past the post. I think they're going to like it once they try it. But you know, like they set up the rules to give $75,000 to a group that previously had no public standing, and they worked to systematically undermine the coalition for proportional representation until it was forced to dissolve. And that was a wonderful coalition to be a part of. 12 community-based organizations, people who are volunteering their time to try to make democracy better. And you know, I could speak more about the biases that are inherent in the legislation, but I do think that they've made this a real uphill battle for the yes side to try to win.
You touched on something, Hannah, that I want to make a very passionate point about it again, but I'm going to resist. Okay. And maybe I'll get it in before it's over, but we'll just go on to questions. But there are no more questions.
And
okay,
it's
so
9 o'clock now.
And it is 9 o'clock. But that's just another important thing. If you are, I used to be a partisan, not anymore, but if you're partisan and going into this election or going into future elections, look back historically at points where we did have two major political parties and we left with 0 or 1 members in opposition, even though they got 35% of the vote. Don't look to predict elections before they happen, but there's a very good possibility in an election when you have a multi-party system. One of the old parties can get still not too bad of a vote, like 25 or 30%, that sort of thing, but get almost no seats because this will be a first past the post election, or get 1 or 2 or 3. Under mixed member proportional, any party that has a decent organization, solid foundation, and has people that want to vote for that party can get representation. Under this first past the post result of election and multi-party system, people that belong to once powerful parties can find themselves suddenly quite surprised and disappointed. Mixed member proportional addresses that problem too.
Yeah. And I think one point I haven't addressed tonight, but I think is very important, that it's part of one of my motivations for being a yes campaigner here, is the arrogance of elected leaders under first past the post. So I truly believe that, you know, even if there's a sort of political revolution takes place on Tuesday and we elect, you know, a Green government with Peter Bevan Baker as the premier, and he's got a 20 seat out of 27 majority on the island, which is, you know, it's within the realms of possibility here, which is shocking. I think no matter how good or well-intentioned your leader is, under first past the post, they are still able to be corrupted and able to become arrogant and to change. Like, we know that people get into politics for the right reasons, but the rules of the game are set up so that it changes people. Politics changes people, and it makes people defensive. It makes people suspicious of each other. It turns into an us and them. And I think no matter if it's Wade McLaughlin or Dennis King, even Baker Joe Byrne, I think that those pressures are there to change the intentions that people come into it with. And if you come in and you've got the ability to push through whatever legislation you want without having to negotiate and listen to others, then you're gonna try to use that and abuse that power. So they say that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and first past the post tends to give us absolute power, tends to give governments absolute power. Proportional systems give that power back to the people, and they restrict the amount of power that any one party and any one party leader can have. And I think that that's a really good thing, keeping our politicians accountable. Yeah.
And if we're making so many points, and you just don't see some of these negative qualities where good people sort of go rogue with power, all that, in the current examples of MMP and some of I spoke of the prime ministers and first ministers of some countries and jurisdictions operating by MMP. It's like if you want the best out of people, then have a better system that brings that out. And that's why voting yes for MMP open ballot is that system that'll bring the best out of people.
All right, so I think we'll wrap up. We'll switch off the live stream now, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Please share our Facebook page with everybody. We're going to try to push it out as much as possible. Check out the videos on our Facebook page and reshare those with people. Sit down, talk with people face to face. Make sure your friends and family understand it. Talk to your parents and grandparents in particular. If you've got young voters who are in that sort of 18 to 25 age group, make sure you bring them to the polls with you on voting day. And yeah, check out our website as well, in particular our frequently asked questions page. I'm actually going to go home tonight and I'm going to try to add the answers to all of the questions you've asked during that live stream to that page. So if you're chatting with people on social media over the next week and somebody says, well, what about rural representation? Then you can just put the link to the answer to that FAQ there rather than having to sort of figure it all out yourself. I hope that the FAQ page can really be a resource for those of us who are advocating for change here, to make it easier for all of us to have those conversations. So, great. Good night, everyone. Mwah, mwah.
Good night. Appreciate it.
How do I turn this thing off? End live video. Bye.